Year 7, this is your second lesson of the Bible stories. I just want to remind you that none of these stories are there to try to challenge any of your views, your religious views. They are just because they influence a lot of literature today. Okay, so let's have a look at your keywords. Your first one is sacrifice. Now, sacrifice is when you're offering food or objects, or sometimes even animals, to please a god. You're just giving something that you want to keep in order to get or do something to help somebody else. So thinking about what that means, have a look at the question. What previous myths and legends that you've studied have involved a sacrifice? So if you stop the recording and write that down for me, please. Your second keyword is morality. Now, let's have a look at what that means. Morality is the principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong or good and bad behaviour. So effectively, morals are a set of beliefs and ways to behave which are enforced and created by society. Okay, so think about your conscience, really. Your conscience is your morals, what you think is right. So looking at the question, how can morality, do you think, be linked to religion? So stop the recording and write down your answer. If you want to aim higher, have a think about how morality might inform our laws. So the laws that we have today, obviously we have a set of created laws that we all have to abide by. How might morality inform our laws? So stop the recording and write down your answer, please. So on your piece of paper, can you please write down your knowledge goal, which today is to compare how the moral concept of sacrifice is presented in two Bible stories. So your steps to success are, you're going to be looking at the story of Cain and Abel, the story of Abraham and Isaac, and how sacrifice is used to convey a moral message in both stories. Then how these moral messages compare to one another. So you're going to be looking at the two stories and seeing how they compare. Now what I want you to do, you can click on the link to watch the video, otherwise you can copy and paste it. As you're watching the video through, can you please make some notes on what you learn about this story about Cain and Abel? Now, what we're going to do, we're going to read the story of Cain and Abel, and you're going to answer the following questions. What moral message is the story giving the reader? And how does this link to the concept or the idea of sacrifice? Sometimes when we read the Bible, we wonder why God cared about some of the things he cared about. The story of Cain and Abel is one of those stories for some people. A long time ago, just after Adam and Eve, as you remember, committed what would be classed as a sin, the original sin, okay, and they ate from the tree of knowledge. Adam and Eve had to leave the Garden of Eden because of this. They were very sad about disobeying God. They asked God how they could show him how sorry they were. God told them that they could show him how they felt by sacrificing a lamb, which they did. After a while, Adam and Eve had two sons. Their first son was called Cain, and their second was called Abel. Cain was a farmer. He grew vegetables and grain, and Abel was a shepherd who looked after the family's herds. Cain and Abel were like most siblings. They didn't always get along, but they were brothers and loved each other very much, despite their occasional fights. Adam and Eve, their mum and dad, told Cain and Abel about the message God had given them, that they should sacrifice a lamb to show God how much they appreciated all he'd done and how sorry they were for his sins. Abel was very concerned that his sacrifice be special to God. He chose his first and best lamb and offered it to the Lord. It was hard for Abel to give up his most prized possession, but it was important to him to try his best to do as God had asked. Cain thought his little brother was a bit silly for giving up his best lamb. Good grief, he thought. We need that lamb. God doesn't. I'm sure he'd be just as happy if we sacrificed the runt of the litter. In fact, why does it need to be a lamb at all? I'm a farmer. It's been a great year for my wheat crop. I can't use everything I've grown. Why don't I just burn some of the extra straw I have? That way I won't be wasting any. Cain's reasoning sounds pretty good when you first hear it, doesn't it? Cain watched as the lamb burnt up completely on the altar while his leftover straw just smouldered a bit and never really caught fire at all. That could mean only one thing. God preferred Abel. Cain was jealous. He didn't take the time or the responsibility to realise that it was his decision to sacrifice straw that caused a difference in God's response to their sacrifices. Instead, he just got angry at his brother. Cain asked Abel to go for a walk with him, and while he was still angry, Cain struck Abel to the ground and killed him. When Cain realised what he'd done, he was more concerned that someone might have seen what he'd done and was so sorry for his brother's death. He looked around and sighed a breath of relief that no one was nearby. And then the Lord spoke. Cain, where is your brother? Cain shrugged. I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? God replied, Cain, how could you be so cruel to your only brother? He's done nothing but try his best for me, for his parents, and for you. Cain fell to the ground sobbing. Finally, he felt the horror of what he'd done, and he had to live with that feeling and the knowledge that he'd murdered his little brother for the rest of his life. Okay, what I would like you to do now is make a note on your paper of what moral message is this story giving the reader, and how does this link to the concept or the idea of sacrifice. So stop the recording now and make your notes. Okay, the next story we're going to be looking at this lesson is the story of Abraham and Isaac. So once again, you can click on the link or copy and paste the YouTube link and watch the story and make notes on what you learn. So now you've seen the story, we're going to listen to me reading it, and you're going to make notes once you've finished on what moral message this story is giving the reader, and how does this link to the concept of sacrifice. Okay. Abraham and his wife Sarah were both in their 90s and never had children. God made a promise that they would have children. Incredibly, they did have a son and called him Isaac. Isaac was very precious to Abraham and Sarah, for he'd been promised by God and miraculously had been born when they were both very old. They wouldn't swap him for the world. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and saddled his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he'd cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the wood and the fire. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, Abraham, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. The fire and wood are here, Isaac said, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham answered him, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place "The Lord will provide," and to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." So what I want you to do now is, on your piece of paper, write down what moral message is this story giving the reader, and how does it link to the concept of sacrifice. So stop the recording now, please, and write down your answer. Now what I'd like you to do is to compare. So look at the similarities and differences between the moral messages of the two stories. Okay. Now, when we talk about morals, we were all born with a moral concept. As I said to you before, morals are like your conscience. You know the difference between right and wrong. Now, these stories might seem strange, but they are, because if you think back to the story of Adam and Eve, because Adam defied God and ate from the forbidden fruit, his penance was to pass down to his children and everybody else the fact that sin is always just round the corner, okay? But it's not an excuse, because we know, our morals tell us the difference between right or wrong, and that's what these stories are trying to teach people. So stop the recording and please write down your answer. So, your final feedback. The word sacrifice, as you know, it's giving up something that you want in order to get something or help somebody else or to please a God. Which story do you find more effective in its use of sacrifice to convey a moral message? So you need to decide which of these stories is more effective. So I want you to stop the recording and explain your answer, please. Your other keyword, which is morality, morals, knowing the difference between right or wrong. I want you now to write an answer to the following question. What moral lessons do both stories teach the reader?